students. So on the board, on the whiteboard behind, will be the names of the students and 3 vertical lines next to each name. Each line represents a life. If the students guess a word which was not in the paragraph, which is wrong, or if they can't guess another word, they can't give you one, then they lose one of their lives, and you mark that on the board. You go around the classroom asking them to give you a suggestion of a word. If they give you a word, for example, the word ago, the first word the student gives you, the first couple, the first pair that you choose to get feedback from, they say ago, then you tell them the number 3. And the students write in the box 3, they write the word ago. And you keep going all the way around the room until eventually you manage to reconstruct the story, the paragraph. A good group, they may be able to place the words themselves in the boxes. This is a little bit like an exercise that students can do online on many websites where the computer automatically gives the students feedback. They have a completely blank text, they're told the title of the text, and they type in words that they think come up. It's a very similar type of exercise, except the students are working collaboratively rather than working independently. And collaborative learning in the classroom is something that we want to encourage. 2 heads are always better than 1. That's why students are working in pairs. The idea is to finish with a complete text and hopefully with lots of people with 3 lives still. If anybody loses their 3 lives, then they can no longer participate. There may be a winner, there may not be a winner. But at least there is an element of competition in trying to complete this almost puzzle, because it's a little bit like a crossword or a word building plan. Okay, so at this stage, they then will see that they have a complete paragraph, the first paragraph of the story. You as a teacher can either give them out a photocopy of the complete paragraph as it is written, or you could show it to them on the PowerPoint, you could show it to them on the screen, and they can check the spelling. It might be good for, at this stage, another thing you could do is ask students to swap their story with another pair in the room and to check each other's spellings and to take off any points for words which have been misspelt. So that at this stage they are concentrating on the form of the word, not just the meaning. There will probably be a lot of details here, things like past tenses of verbs, ed at the end. I'm sure there'll be many students who have forgotten the ed, or even don't realise that it is actually in the past tense, the story. So at the end, when the teacher is checking, as the students check their words with the grid, they can, the teacher can point out that this story is in the past tense, it's ed endings, that it's an emperor, because the word emperor, number 7, begins with an E, begins with a vowel, which means that we use an and not a. Details which at a pre-intermediate level may frequently be missing. Things like plural endings with S's on the end of clothes also may be a problem. But in general, these are quite simple words. All of them, most of them, many of them are monosyllabic words, and I wouldn't expect them to have problems with writing this. So the end of the first activity, the dictation, the first paragraph of the story has been finished at this stage. And the students have an introduction to a story. You could ask some questions just to check their understanding of the story so far. When did the emperor live? What did he like? You could ask these to them orally if you felt that they were not fully understanding or fully focusing on the meaning of the story. Because at this point, you also want the students now to start thinking about what's going to happen next. This is the first of 8 paragraphs. All of them are quite short like this. But the rest of the story, they're going to have to choose which option they think is a good option to continue the story with. What ideas would happen, what will happen next in the story. But before we go on, in the next part of the story, there are going to be some slightly more difficult words. So I have another vocabulary section, which is this time a more focused vocabulary section, in which I wish to pre-teach 7 words to the students which they need to know to get the full gist of the story. And this is called vocabulary definitions, and these are the words which I would like them to know the meanings of. Some of them I think they can guess because they are cognates of words in Spanish, and this also serves to reinforce the fact that many times there are words which are very similar in Spanish and English. They may sound different when we pronounce them, but they're very similar, and in fact we're quite lucky to be learning English rather than other languages because it's much easier in that respect. So words like invisible, words like magnificent are going to be recognizable, probably even confused. But words like, even words like vanity, vanidoso, or vanidad, something, depending again on the level of your group, you could be indicating the ty at the end of a word as equivalent to dad at the end of words in Spanish, in nouns. And you could ask students to give you examples of that. That's something, but again, it's not the main focus of the class, so we don't want to do that. We only would do that with a higher level group where students were going through the material very quickly and you felt that you were able to ask that question and add to their knowledge, but without distracting them from the main focus. Now, there are 2 ways of doing this, either to show students the words and then show them the next slide. They would have this as a photocopy, this particular slide, with the definitions, and ask them to match it, or to go straight to the definitions on the PowerPoint and ask them, reading them the definitions one by one, if they knew any words that one word, single words, which would define that explanation, which would signify or mean the same thing as that explanation. Extremely good or beautiful. And somebody might say excellent. And you could write down a list of their alternatives. This would be a more challenging way of presenting the vocabulary, and it would involve thinking about more vocabulary, synonyms which mean the same as the words that we've just seen. If the group was weaker and much, it would be good just to provide them, and I will try and go back to the previous slide. No. There. Just to provide them with a photocopy where they had the words and underneath they had the definitions. There are a couple of words here which they may have, which may be new to them because they are actually false cognates. The word like procession, they may confuse with processo, and they may not realize it means desfile, so they would be actually learning something new, even probably the more advanced students at this level. This I would expect to take, depending on the level again, 5 to 10 minutes. It's a fairly short exercise, but it will be indicated to them that these words, they're going to read them in the rest of the story. And with those words, this is the stage now which you can start to ask them to think about what might happen next. And it's the possibility for them to explore their own imagination. You can immediately go into the next stage by eliciting their ideas if they were a very talkative, very quick class. If they were slower, you would need to give them time in pairs to talk about what they think might happen to the emperor with his clothes. You could write some guiding questions on the board. If the students were very stuck and were very quiet and didn't know what had no ideas which they could express in English, which might guide them a little bit more. For example, what did the emperor do with his clothes? What did the people think of the emperor? Were there any other people in the story? I haven't written those questions up on the PowerPoint here because I was assuming that the class would be a class which would be able to go into this exploratory stage, but very often students can surprise us and they don't have ideas when we want them to have or when we expect them to have, and we need to provoke them more. We can use questions, or we can ask them to think about other stories that they've heard about emperors, what kind of people they were like and what happened to them.